Hey, what's good? Welcome to the Sabol Brothers on the Baseline podcast, part of the Press Play Podcast Network. Hello, everyone. I'm John Sabol.
And I'm Scott Sabol.
And we're brothers. And we're going to be talking about Cleveland sports at a different level and a different interest than maybe your normal, typical Cleveland sports right here on the Sabol Brothers on the Baseline podcast.
Yeah, so we're going to have a whole lot of different guests on our podcast, a lot of guests that you've heard of, a lot of, big names from Cleveland sports history, but we're also going to have guests of people that you might not have heard of before. They're kind of I call them like the behind the scenes drivers of sports. Of some of the sports teams, and maybe giving you a little bit of a historical or maybe a statistical angle that maybe you're not aware of, that you don't hear every day. So we're going to try to, dive deep and kind of get a little bit of a peek behind the curtain as we continue down the road.
And one thing that Scott and I have in common, besides that we're brothers, besides we love Cleveland sports, is he and I have a big interest level in the history of Cleveland sports. And we're not talking about just a few years ago, the Cavs winning the championship. We'd like to go maybe a little farther back, but on a different path. And what we mean by that is we're going to be talking about people like Scott just mentioned that you may not have heard of, that have an interesting and unique tie to the sports teams we grew up loving, rooting for, and still do root for. And I think everyone out there, you guys are really going to enjoy what we're going to be able to bring to this podcast right here on the Press Play Podcast Network. So with that being said, Scott, I think it's time that we go ahead right into talking to our first guest here on the inaugural episode number 1. This is a Cleveland legend, my all-time favorite Cleveland athlete.
Mine too. Sure.
We also have a personal connection to him, to a place where we both grew up.
Right.
We'll have that coming up in our guest in our interview right after this.
Hey everybody, it's Sam Amico from Cavs on the Break NBA podcast. Be sure to give us a listen for all your Cleveland Cavaliers recaps, analysis, breakdowns, draft talk, free agency. The list goes on and on. Give us a listen, Cavs on the Break NBA podcast.
Hi, my name is Jeremy Powell, co-host of the Oranges, Oranger, Browns podcast. Check us out anywhere you listen to podcasts. For all your Browns coverage, post-game, pre-game, anything you need Browns, you'll find it here on the Oranges, Oranger, Browns podcast.
Hey, I'm Jason.
And I'm Gary, and we love ball cards.
And if you love ball cards too, good news. You just found your new favorite podcast. From breaks to grading.
And from collecting to flipping, join us on the Ball Card Show.
The sports podcast for the sports collector.
All right, we're back here on the Press Play Podcast Network. John Sabol alongside Scott Sabol on the Brothers on the Baseline podcast. And we are joined with a former Cleveland Cavalier great that Scott and I grew up watching, one of our favorite athletes of all time. His number's retired in the rafters at Rocket Mortgage Fieldhouse, number 25, Mark Price. Mark, thank you so much for taking your time out of your busy day today.
Oh, pleasure, guys. Pleasure.
Mark, how are you doing? How's everything going with the family over the last year and a half with COVID? Are you guys hanging in there? Have you guys stayed healthy?
Yeah, we've been blessed. We've all caught COVID, but, it hadn't been a problem. Everybody's healthy now and doing well. Of course, all the kids were empty nesters now with our baby just is about to graduate college. So, it's amazing how quick it goes by. But, everybody's doing well. My two daughters are both married already. And my oldest son's 26 and my youngest is 22. So it's amazing how time flies.
Absolutely. I remember growing up in Hudson, and I know you don't remember this, but I remember running into you at Apple's, which was the grocery store in Hudson. And I think you might have had your oldest, who might have been an infant at the time. I mean, I'm thinking, man, that was that long ago.
Yeah. My first 3 were born while I was playing, with the Cavs. And so I'm sure that, first one and living in Hudson, after first couple of years living in an apartment, but finally bought a house in Hudson there. And we loved Hudson. It was a great town. And of course, convenient to Richfield. There's about 15 minutes door to door for me to get to the games. So that was a great spot.
Right. Driving right down 303 right through the peninsula, and you were right there.
Yep.
Yeah, it's funny, Mark. We knew the neighborhood you lived in because growing up, we had kids that would always, and classmates of ours, always would go trick-or-treating in your neighborhood and Brad Doherty's neighborhood, which wasn't too far away. So we always had an idea. But, we grew up right. I don't know if you remember where that Apple's grocery store that Scott was talking about. It was on the border of Hudson and Stowe. And our parents lived and still do live right across from that old shopping center there on the border on Norton Road. So
I remember it well.
Yeah, crazy small time, small world, really. So, Mark, what are you up to these days? I know a lot of Cavs fans are curious to what you're doing.
Yeah, I'm actually, we just moved back to the Atlanta area. We've been in Charlotte for the last 7 years. I've been coaching up until about the last year. Coached, at the NBA level for 8-9 years. Coached college for a few years, and I'm kind of in transition right at the moment. Just kind of, seeing what's next. Now that COVID's kind of calming down a little bit. Hopefully things will get more back to normal, and we'll see what opportunities are out there. But right now I'm just kind of a free agent and kind of seeing what's next.
Well, before we get into your Cavalier days, let's talk about your past growing up in Oklahoma. Now, your dad was a college basketball coach. He coached you and your brothers growing up and had a big influence on your life on and off the court. Did you ever feel pressured, walking in your dad's footsteps? Did he ever pressure you into going into basketball, or did he let you guys kind of pick your own route?
No, my dad, he was always there to help. My dad was a coach, as you mentioned, most of my life growing up. And, it's funny that you mentioned that, because yesterday actually was the day that 21 years ago that my father passed away. And so it was kind of a sad day yesterday for me, because even though it's been 21 years, my dad was always my hero growing up, and just, taught me so many things, not just basketball, of course, but he was such a good man about life, about my relationship with the Lord, all those things that are so important to me and my family. And he was such a great mentor. But he taught me how to shoot. That's for sure. And, I think I was his guinea pig being his first child, but I can say, I guess he knew what he was doing. It worked out pretty well, but he was so busy coaching most of the time. I think people think, oh, my dad was out there working with us all the time, but he really wasn't. I mean, I think the advantage that I had, and my brothers as well, is that we were just around the game all the time. I mean, he'd load us in the car, whether he was coaching a college team. He was a assistant for the Phoenix Suns for 2 years. And so I was just exposed to like so much basketball, and I just took it all in. My mom says, I was about 10 years old when my father was coaching with the Phoenix Suns. And she said most of the other 10-year-olds at the game were running around trying to get popcorn and ice cream. And she said I would sit like glued to my seat and just watch everything those guys were doing. And then I'd go home and try to emulate them. And it was funny when someone asked me when I was about 10, they said, what are you going to do when you grow up? I said, well, I'm going to be an NBA player, of course. Sure. I never quite grew into that, at 5'11", 155 pounds coming out of high school. I think people thought I was a little crazy with those thoughts, but it was a passion for me. And obviously my dad helped whenever he could and gave me guidance along the way. But, a lot of it was just up to me. And my dad, I remember many times saying, I'll help you, but it's, however far you go, whatever you do, it's going to be on you. You got to put the effort, the time in, the work in that it's going to take to be successful.
Other than your father, what other coach or player or maybe somebody else, a teacher, anybody else made a big impact on your playing career?
Well, I think all my coaches that I had made an impact. I can't remember who said it one time, but I don't know that there's any other job or position out there that can have more impact on a young man or young lady than their coach. I mean, you meet a million people in life and you see names and you forget names, but I can almost guarantee if I were to say, what's your high school coach's name? And you'd remember that. I mean, they're people that impact you. And from college to the pros, Bobby Crimmins at Georgia Tech. Obviously I was blessed to play for him. Lenny Wilkins, my first 7 years, what a great coach and person he was. So I had a lot of guys to learn from and to look up to along the way, and that was obviously very helpful.
What advice have you given your kids as they become athletes in high school and, as they've moved on into college?
Yeah, a lot of the similar things that my parents tried to instill in me growing up. I would be there for them, try to help them as much as I could, but just trying to teach them the work ethic, and I feel blessed. My oldest daughter, she played some sports in high school, but she didn't want to pursue that route in college. But my next three, my second daughter played tennis at the University of North Carolina. And both my boys have played college basketball. And so, it's something that they've worked for and earned and helped, but just try to instill the work ethic that it takes. I think, even especially kids, I think, whose parents have made it, might somehow think it might be easy to accomplish those goals, but it's not. There's a million kids out there that are fighting for college scholarships or trying to make it to the NBA or whatever professional sport or anything like that. And so it's not easy to get a scholarship. It's not easy to be able to accomplish those things. And so I'm proud of my kids that they put the work in to achieve their goals.
Mark, let's talk about your Cavaliers days. I know we kind of just touched on growing up in Hudson for Scott and I, and then you, of course, living there with your family and commuting to those Cavaliers days at the Coliseum. What was it like for you once you got settled into like a small town like that, and then going to a basketball arena pretty much in the middle of nowhere? I know, look at the league now, you don't really have that anymore. Did it kind of give it more of a sense of a community, a tight-knit entity, if you will, when you had the city of Hudson and then you had the Richfield, Boston Heights area, all kind of like, was the perfect storm to have that unity as a team and pretty much as a community in a whole?
Yeah, I think it, for me especially, it was really a perfect place and a perfect fit. I grew up in a small town in Oklahoma. When I went off to college to Atlanta, Georgia, I mean, it was the biggest place I'd ever seen in my life, and so, being able to play and live in a town called Hudson and just the way the people, we were just part of the town. I mean, there's several of us lived in that area and in the surrounding area. And, we just had a bunch of good guys, family guys. We all started having kids around the same time, hanging out at each other's home, but just being part of the community. And I think for our teams, I think that's why, there's such a special place and a relationship with the Cavs fans, with our team in particular, because, I think they felt like they were that we were just one of them. I mean, we were able to go out there and play at the highest level on the basketball stage, but off the court, we were just like everybody else, trying to raise our families and be part of the community and support each other. And it was great. We loved our time there in Hudson and in those years that I was with the Cavs.
So we're going to get down to some technical basketball here. Splitting the double team. All right. I remember looking at YouTube clips, looking back at you splitting the double team. And, we took it for granted watching that growing up. But it seemed like you revolutionized that back in the day. When did you learn this? When did you perfect it? Was it in high school, college? Did it come just organically? How did you do it?
Yeah, I wish there was some really, really great story about, how I developed that, out of thin air, but it kind of just happened. I remember very clearly, it was my rookie season and we had played the Philadelphia 76ers at home. And I had a career high for me as a rookie. I had like 29 points. I was just nailing threes all over the place, and times you play games with the same team. And so we went on the next day, we flew back to Philly and played the Sixers the next night. So, of course, when I got in the game, I was coming off the bench at that time in my career. They weren't going to let me go off again. And so they just started jumping me, double teaming me every single time I came off a pick and roll. And I just remember coming off one time and the big guy kind of jumped too far. And I just instinctively kind of, split it right about to the elbow, pulled up and made a jump shot. And Mo Cheeks, the great, veteran guard from Philadelphia, as we're running down the floor, he said, man, that was a sweet move right there. So, yeah, I kind of tucked that away. I was like, hey, if Mo Cheeks thinks that's a sweet move, I think I'm going to keep that and start working on it a little bit.
Right.
Yeah, Mark, because you don't see very many players, especially like point guards, shooting guards, do that as much anymore, like split the double team like that. It's almost like a lost art.
It is a little bit of a lost art. I would say that I think probably the way defenses are being played right now, most teams are switching to pick and rolls now a lot, it seems. And so the opportunity for splitting that, but you'll see it every once in a while, see it at the college level. I mean, I'll see guys do it, and it's always fun to kind of, say, hey, I'm the one that created that. Kind of fun to watch other guys do it.
Yeah. Mark, do you have a favorite memory in particular, one memory of your Cavaliers tenure, maybe did it occur at the Coliseum?
Yeah. I mean, so many. I mean, of course, when we had it rolling there, playing the Bulls in the playoffs and all those kinds of things. I mean, that Coliseum was just rocking. I mean, it was such a fun place to play a game. But I think probably my biggest memory, probably the fondest, is when we played Boston in the Eastern Conference semifinals, Larry Bird's last season. And so it was a great series. It went 7 games, and we got to finish it up in the Coliseum, and we kind of ran them out of the gym in game 7. And, so I like to tell everybody I ended Larry Bird's career. That was his last game. And but what a great experience. And, I just felt blessed. So many of the greatest players of all time played in my era. And Larry was obviously right up there with the best. And to get a chance to play against guys like that, those are the memories that I always remember.
What was the most gut-wrenching loss in your career? Was it Jordan's shot? We always think about that because that's always played all the time on ESPN. Or was there some other moment in your career that maybe we're not aware of that might, at least when you look back with everybody else, might take a backseat to Jordan's shot? Was there something that just sticks out in your mind when you watch a game that's like, man, I wish I could have that back?
Yeah, I think no doubt it was, there was so much that went into that series that Jordan beat us with the last shot. And most people don't realize that we had beaten the Bulls like 6 times that season. Mm-hmm. We were 6-0 against them. We were the far better team. And unfortunately, sometimes going into playoffs, it's not how good you are, it's how healthy you are. And we were really banged up that year. I couldn't even play in the first game because I had a pulled hamstring. Chicago stole that first game. And also the other thing people don't realize is that was a first round series.
Right.
I mean, we were predicted to win it, but you only played 5 games. And so the chance to steal a series was so much greater back in those days. All you had to do was kind of steal one game on the road kind of deal. And you could knock somebody off. And that's what happened. We were kind of against the wall, but we had to go into Chicago game 4, and we had to win to get it back to Cleveland. Mm-hmm. And we did. We beat them on their home court. We got game 5 back. And of course that last game was just legendary, back and forth the whole game. And 6 seconds to go, we were down 1. A lot of people don't realize that we were down 1, and we threw it in. Craig Elo cut to the basket, scored a layup. Unfortunately, scored too quick. There were still 3 seconds left on the clock. And then, of course, Michael hit that shot. But, it was gut-wrenching. I think more than anything else is because, 1, we knew we were the better team. But 2, we just weren't healthy. And it was disappointing because if we get past the Bulls, we felt like we had a legit chance at competing for it that year.
Mark, I don't know. Did you get a chance to watch the Jordan documentary last year, The Last Dance?
I did. I'm glad our part was early on so I could enjoy the rest of it because I figured that one was going to be in there.
Sure. And of course it was. And, it was referenced in that documentary and referenced by Jordan himself that the momentum between your Cavs teams and his Bulls rivalry and maybe, Cleveland's championship aspirations changed when the team traded Ron Harper. Do you agree with that? And as a follow-up, how big of a blow was that to the team when that happened?
I do agree with that. Ron and I just at that time, we were really, really young in our careers, but even at that time, I felt like we were top 2 or 3 guard tandems in the league. Plus you had Craig Elo coming off the bench. I mean, we had just such a great roster. I mean, Ron was such a good fit for me and the way we played together, and Ron's ability to kind of slash. And yeah, Jordan was going to get his 30, but Ron was going to get 20 to 25, and Michael was going to have to guard somebody. And so, that made it tougher for Chicago. And yeah, it was disappointing. I still to this day don't really know. I never asked a lot of questions once it happened, because it happened so quickly. It was different times. You didn't have social media and guys scooping stories here and there. So, I mean, when I found out about the trade, probably like you guys did on the news or whatever. And so it was obviously disappointing. And I talk to Ron all the time, and it's funny because, Ron will tell you, I mean, his favorite team was our Cavs team, even though he won championships with the Bulls and all that. Our group was special, and I hated that it got split up like that, but life is life, and you have to deal with things and move on. But yeah, I hated that when he did get traded.
Mark, as a follow-up to that, as you're quoted in Terry Polito's new book, The Vintage Cavs, and it's a great book for any Cavs fan out there. And he touched on that Ron Harper situation and talked about the inner workings of what happened. And we don't need to go into it now, but it sounds like, your GM at the time, Wayne Embry, that's kind of one of his biggest regrets is dealing him. And we all know what happened later.
Yeah. And I mean, it's so, it's always easy to second guess, what people do. And, Wayne was such a great general manager. I have great respect for him. And, they had their reasons, sometimes they work out, sometimes they don't. That one was one that I don't think we quite ever really were able to recover from totally. We were able to compete and do well, but Ron was just the kind of guy, kind of player that was made for playoff basketball, and was a guy that we really missed when we got to the playoffs.
So, Mark, players often talk about going out on the top of their game. You hear it all the time. Was there a time or a moment in your career when you knew it was time to hang it up, or did it happen gradually?
Well, I think I think it just happens gradually. I don't think you wake up one day and say, okay, I'm just going to retire. But, I was fortunate and blessed to play my first 9 years in Cleveland in one place. And we were, my family, we mentioned my kids were born there and raised. And then the last 4 years of my career was with 4 different teams, and traveling with a young family like that, it makes it really hard and difficult. And I just knew, that last time that it was time for me to move on and, kind of try to establish a little bit more of a normal life for my family, my kids, and be in a place where they could grow up.
Was it hard adjusting to life after pro basketball? We always hear athletes sometimes that they're bored. They just have that difficult adjustment. Did you have a difficult time adjusting?
Not at first, really. I was really beat up and banged up from a long career. I was looking forward to having a few years to just kind of regroup and really get to lock in and spend time with my kids at an early age. And so, I felt blessed with that. But then, I think, when you've had the kind of success that I had playing, that the game kind of keeps calling out to you a little bit. And I start having people want me work, whether it be help them with their jump shots. I started a shooting academy in Atlanta. The NBA team started sending players to me. I was doing well, but then the next step was teams wanted me year round to work with them. And that kind of led right into the coaching thing. And so it took me a while to jump back in with both feet that way, just because I didn't want to, I just knew what a grind it is and what a commitment it is. And at that point in time, I didn't want to sacrifice that for my family. But as my kids started getting older and, kind of just kept moving toward eventually, getting back into the basketball full time. And so I took my time with it, jumping back in, but I'm glad the way that I did, because I wouldn't have missed that chance with my kids for anything.
So you got Steph Curry, who's number one, Steve Nash, and then you, number two, number three, all-time free throw percentage. And it's only by like thousandths of a percent when you look at the list. You only need 10 free throws to go into second place. What would it take for you to come out of retirement and go, you know what, I think I can make 10 of these to get into second place? I'm a stat guy. That's why I ask.
Yeah, no, I could do that. I could do that in 2 games. But it's funny because I remember this was before Steph, but when Steve Nash was kind of on my tail, I was coaching with the Golden State Warriors one year, and Steve had just actually passed me like the game before they came to play us, and so I went out and talked to him before the game and said, Steve, you got to miss a couple tonight, man, because I got to slide back up. And sure enough, he did. So I went from second back to first for a little bit. But the next time he went past me, he retired.
That's funny.
I was like, come on, man. But yeah, it's fun, though. I mean, there's just so few guys that have ever shot over 90% for their career. I'm in really good company there. So I'm good.
On that free throw topic, Mark, I heard recently in a radio interview, you made 100 consecutive free throws in practice and stopped at 100 because you were bored. How many consecutive threes have you made in a practice and then in a game, if you could recall? I'm just curious, because when I heard that, I was like, oh man, I need to know how many threes you've hit.
Well, that's a good question, because I never kind of just sat there and tried to see how many threes I could make in a row. So I don't know. I couldn't really give you a number on that, but I know I used to play a game all the time with guys at the end. We'd shoot about, 25 threes from 5 different spots going around and the goal was to get all the way around without missing. And I was able to do that, a lot. So, but I don't know how many I could have made if I tried to just make them in a row.
So who wins a free throw or a 3-point contest, you or one of your sons?
I do.
Wow, there's no hesitation there. That's great.
Because those are standing still. Now, if I got to get out and move with them and play anymore, I don't have a chance.
Right.
But if I can just stand in one spot and shoot, I think I can still hold my own.
And one of your sons a few days ago tweeted a video of you. Was it coming off a screen on like in the elbow or something on the three, and you dropped it like no problem, nothing but net. So I mean, you still had game.
Well, yeah, you got to pick and choose, though. I got to pick my moments. Of course, doing that one day, I have to take about 2 weeks off to recover.
Now, Mark, if you played in today's NBA with the major influx of 3-point shooting and attempts, I think, my opinion, and I know Scott agrees with me on this, that your game back in the late 80s, early 90s, and mid 90s would really excel and be more productive in today's game. I mean, you just missed that era. Would you agree?
Totally agree. I played in an era where it was, you played through the post most of the time first. Everybody had a great postman, in the NBA back then, and you threw it inside, and, taking the three was never just, and I did it. I was a lot of people used to say I was one of the first guys to actually just dribble the ball up the court and just shoot a three if I was open. You didn't see a lot of that. The point guard position was a little bit more of kind of a Mo Cheek style, traditional type point guard when I first got in the league. And people probably thought I shot a lot as a point guard, but it's funny because I actually led the league in 3-point attempts 2 or 3 times at 5 a game, and so that just shows you the different style that the game was played. That's like a first quarter stat now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Right. I think Steph Curry and Klay Thompson and a few other guys, attempt anywhere between like 9 or 12 threes a game nowadays. It's just incredible.
It really is. I mean, I was definitely before my time because I would certainly have fun anyway in playing in today's game.
So, Mark, a lot of times when I drive to my parents' house, we get off right there at the 303 exit driving into Richfield, and I point out to my kids, that's where the Coliseum was. And they're sick of me telling all this story, and I always tell them coming down there and watching Cavs games and some of the stories that I have as a fan. But do you have any untold crazy podcast-friendly stories from your NBA days playing in Richfield? For instance, I heard a story of Brad Daugherty I don't know if it was before or after games, he would go out back and like shoot squirrels or shoot deer, stuff that would never happen today. But are there any goofy stories like that from your playing days at the Coliseum?
Yeah, it was definitely a different place. I mean, of course, on game day, you had all the fans coming, but, when we just go over there for practice, I mean, you're just in this big open empty field. And we had a lot of Brad, Larry, all those guys, Hot Rod, they were all into the hunting, fishing, things. Surprisingly, I'm from Oklahoma and I wasn't into it as much, but yeah, a lot of times after practice, instead of, going home like most guys would go out hunting and fishing after practice. So it was a little bit different, but what a great place. It's hard I've driven by there myself, and to not even have the building there anymore, I'm just like, it's sad for me to know that that's not there.
Mark, when the Cavs moved out of the Coliseum into Gund Arena, I think you played one season there in Gund Arena before you left. When you then, I think a few years later, they ended up tearing down the Coliseum. When you left or when you came back, did you take anything from the Coliseum as a memento or something nostalgic that you always saw? Because you've heard stories of like Derek Jeter with the Yankees. When they tore down Yankee Stadium, he took a sign or had taken something from the locker room or a hallway or a tunnel. I don't know if you're into that or if there's anything that you came across that you took anything to that knowledge.
Yeah, I actually got a piece of the floor that we played on, at the Coliseum, just to have it as a keepsake. And so that's pretty cool. But they offered some things to the players, that had played there before they just demolished everything. And so it was a nice gesture. And I took them up on a piece of the floor.
I don't know if you remember this. Back in like maybe last year, I was tweeting with you about a guy that I know that had went into the Coliseum before they tore it down. And he took your locker room seat. Do you remember? I don't know if you remember this Twitter conversation. He still has it.
Is that right?
Yeah, he still has it. And he's out in California. His name's Bob Busser. We're going to have him on the podcast later on this summer, but he still has it. And he was telling me about how there was a ton of stuff in there. And then when they tore it down, they left a lot of the stuff in there, a lot of like signage or, cool things like that. And I know fans nowadays would love that stuff. You see it on eBay and, auctions, but he's like, yeah, the one thing, he took a few things, but the biggest thing he said was, I walked into the locker room and I saw Mark Price's nameplate and I saw the orange chair and it had 25. And I'm like, and he was one of your favorite players and he grabbed it. Yeah. So I thought that was kind of cool.
That is really cool.
So, Mark, do you still follow the Cavs as they're in the middle of rebuilding? And are you following the draft and everything that goes into it as we kind of head into the middle of the summer?
I do keep up with the Cavs as best I can, and obviously, my heart's always going to be with the Cavalier organization, and so I pull for them. And it's been, I'm sure like everybody else, it's been a little hard to watch the last few years, but hopefully they'll get a good player this year and can turn the corner. I think they got some good young pieces, but they just haven't been able to turn the corner quite yet. So hopefully that can happen.
Are there any prospects that you see, Mark, that the Cavs would like to take at 3? I mean, there's a lot of them there, but any ones that you think that they would like more than others, or a specific guy that may or may not be perfect?
Yeah, I think the challenge is, they've had pretty high draft picks the last couple of years, and they kind of the last few have gotten a lot of guards, and it seems like some of the better players in this year's draft are guards. And so it'll be interesting to see what they do if they try to make some moves and take a guard or use that pick to try to get a really good player at another position to come in. I think they've got to fill out the roster overall. It's got to be filled out better than what it is right now. Like I said, I think they got some good young guards, but they really do need to add a couple veteran pieces, guys that just know how to play, that can, because you watch, I mean, the Eastern Conference, I mean, the Atlanta Hawks were in the Eastern Conference Finals this year. So, I mean, it's not like the East used to be when I played. It's like, you can add the right couple pieces, and I think you can make a big move in the Eastern Conference pretty quickly.
Yeah, I don't think the Cavs are going to get him. I think he'll be gone, but I really like Cade Cunningham coming out. I know he's he's a piece that they could really use as a nice wing, that's got a lot of great game. I know the Jalen Green kid in the G League Ignite would be great. Suggs, Evan Mobley, the big would fit nicely. It just depends on where they're slotted at. But I think if there's never such thing as a surefire draft pick, right? But if there is in this class, it seems like it's Cunningham. But this is a good position the Cavs are in, being a top 5 pick. This is where they needed to be, and they have a 3, so they can't go wrong. They got a nice little decision to make.
Yeah, for sure. And I think this is probably the year they got to get it right, because they can't, you can't miss on a number 3 pick. It's got to be a guy that can be somewhat of a franchise player for you. If you keep the pick, I'm quite familiar with Cade Cunningham, being from Oklahoma. So, he's obviously a very good player, but with his size and, can play multiple positions out there on the floor. He reminds me in some sense of a Ben Simmons type of talent. I think he's obviously a better shooter than Simmons, but with that size, able to handle the ball, you can play him at a lot of different positions.
So, Mark, it's interesting. You're kind of breaking down the players here, and you've been an assistant coach and a shooting coach in the NBA for a variety of years in different teams. Could you ever see yourself maybe either becoming a head coach or get out of coaching and going straight into a front office of a team?
Yeah, I think, I love the game. I feel like I have a lot to offer. If the right opportunity presented itself, I certainly would be interested in those opportunities. But, it's, which side, I've always really been partial to the development side of things. I love working with players. I love trying to help them get better. Being hands-on that way, but the other side's intriguing as well. Getting a chance to try to put pieces together, form a team. I'm into that as well because I was part of that. We had a special unit of guys that came in, all the pieces fit together, and they show what kind of success you can have when that happens. But so both sides of it are intriguing, but we'll see what opportunities present themselves down the road.
So, Mark, one question about the Cavs, and then we're going to have some rapid fire, just general questions for you. Do you still keep track and still keep in contact with a lot of Cavs players, especially since the Cavs won the title a few years back?
I do keep the guys I played with, Brad, Larry, Craig, all those guys I'm extremely close with. We stay in contact all the time. And so obviously for all of us, it was fun to get to see the Cavs win a championship a few years ago. And you just feel that you were part of that foundation that was laid to get to that point. And so it was fun to watch that. You still felt like we were a part, but it's, we like, we're the old guys. We like getting on and talking and complaining about the young guys. And, how, old school versus new school, sure, and all that kind of stuff. But it's a lot of fun, good banter. It was really fun a year or so ago when they brought all of us back for the 50th anniversary for the Cavs. It was so much fun getting to just see everybody and hang out together for a couple of days. And it was a blast.
Before we go in the rapid fire, I have a follow-up to that because you talk about being the old guys. Mark, was it weird to you to see a few years ago when Steph Curry came in the league, because you played with Del Curry, his father with the Cavs, and Steph was born in Akron. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, Larry Nance Jr., born right there, went to Revere High School, and now he's playing for the Cavs. Is it kind of weird to be that former player, to see the kids when they were just little babies and then maybe around practice, dribbling the ball a little bit, now playing in the NBA? And I'm sure we can come up with other examples, but those are the first two that have some type of Cleveland or Cavs connection, obviously, connection to you that come to mind.
Yeah. It's really fun getting to watch. Like I said, we all were so close knit group. I remember when Steph was like 2 and Del would bring him to practice from time to time. And so, Larry Jr. as well, and those guys. And so it's just, it's fun to get to see them, step into their father's shoes, get a chance. And, Larry in particular playing for the Cavs. I know, I talk to Larry Sr. all the time, and that's just a super thrill for him, just that he's playing in his backyard and he can go watch him play every night.
All right, Mark. So we got your rapid fire, real basic questions. You ready?
I'm ready.
Your all-time favorite musical artist?
All-time favorite musical artist. Well, those are tough. I thought you were going to go with
basketball.
Yeah,
that
was
my brother's question.
Probably back in the day, there was a Christian group called the Imperials. They were probably my favorite group.
Okay. TV show you and your wife or you alone are watching right now?
What's the last series we watched? We kind of like Bull. I don't know if you're familiar with Bull, the crime solving, pick a jury kind of. It's a different little bit of take on a jury scene. So we kind of enjoy that show.
Okay, who's better? I'm sure you've been asked this question a million times, but we have to ask it because, that's what we do. Who's better, Jordan or LeBron, if you needed them in a game 7 situation?
Yeah, it's hard to compare those guys. People try to do it all the time. They were two totally different type players. But if you got to win one game and you got to have a guy make one shot, I got to go with Jordan.
But would you say he's the overall better player than LeBron?
Not necessarily. LeBron may be an overall better basketball player, but just pure scoring, pure will to win, pure you want to get a ring, got to go with Michael.
Okay. I had to get that clarified because I was curious to know your answer. All right. If you're building an NBA team right now at this moment here on July 8th of this recording, who are a couple players, maybe one in particular, that are in the NBA at their current age and skill set that you would like to build around?
There's a lot of good young players in the league right now, but I think some of the easy ones are Giannis, Milwaukee. He's the guy you can win around. And then I really love the both two guys in Phoenix, Ayton and Booker. Those are two guys I really, really enjoy watching play. And so, the kid here in Atlanta, Trae Young, is turned out to be a fabulous little player. And so there's a lot of really good guys, and I think that's the key. Obviously, you hate to pass on Steph as well out there at Golden State. He's still even quote unquote older guy, still lighting it up. But there's a lot of fun players out there that you could build around.
Favorite sports team you root for in any league, any sport?
Basketball, obviously the Cavs. My college team, Georgia Tech. NFL, that's a hard one for me. I grew up a diehard Dallas Cowboys fan, but so when I played in Cleveland, I fell in love with the Browns, and so I pull for both of those. And to be honest, I don't follow baseball much. So,
other than the Richfield Coliseum, which we've talked extensively about, what was your favorite venue or arena you played in the NBA?
No doubt the Boston Garden, the old Boston Garden. And I was fortunate enough to get to play in all the old East Coast arenas, the Spectrum in Philly, old Chicago Stadium. Those places were just had such history, and old Madison Square Garden as well. So all those places were fun, but if I had to pick one, it would have been the Boston Garden.
For you, toughest player to guard?
Toughest player to guard. Probably a guy that we had many, many battles with over the years, Isaiah Thomas with the Pistons. We went at it. He was a great player, and he was tough to guard.
So I guess this kind of answers that question too. Besides Jordan, the one player you dreaded playing against, that would probably be Isaiah Thomas, or would that be somebody else?
No, I wouldn't say I dreaded. I actually kind of looked forward to those matchups. You had to bring your A game, and there wasn't really a guy I dreaded playing against. I love the competition. I love going out, competing. It didn't really matter who it was or where it was. I loved getting a chance to go out and see what I could do.
So how about your favorite version or least favorite Cavs uniform version you wore? From the Cavs V with the little net to what you finished out in?
Yeah, I love the old, the blue and orange combo. After my first year, the one I hated the most was probably my rookie year road uniforms. They were just the bright orange.
Those are fan favorites, though.
You felt like a pumpkin running out there. Yeah, and so, but definitely my favorite were the years we had the blue, the royal blue with the orange numbers.
A quick follow-up on the jersey question, Mark. Out of all the jerseys that you've worn in every team, including the Cavs, do you still have those jerseys, warm-ups, and shorts?
I do. I have all my uniforms.
Very cool. Okay.
I can't fit in my college ones anymore for some reason, but
all right. Favorite restaurant in the Cleveland, Akron, Hudson area that you love to eat, either was by yourself or with your teammates, or maybe with your family, with the kids when they were a lot younger?
Yeah, I don't think it's there anymore, but when we played at the Richfield Coliseum, there was a place called the Tavern of Richfield, and used to go there after games many a time. It was a great restaurant. I loved going there, and they had great ownership there, and it was fun.
Did you go to Whitey's a lot?
I did go to Whitey's. Yeah. If I wanted a burger, I'd head over to Whitey's.
Nice.
And finally, your favorite Browns or Indians player you met during your time in Cleveland?
Yeah. Kenny Lofton with the Indians, and Bernie Kosar.
Two solid picks right there.
Well, Mark, we want to thank you very much for joining us on the podcast. I know it took, 45 minutes of your time today, but it's an honor and a pleasure to talk to you and to recap the old days and kind of get your perspective on what's going on in your life and the world in basketball in general. So we want to thank you very much for joining us.
It's my pleasure, guys. I appreciate you having me on. Good luck with the podcast moving forward, and all the best.
Mark, thanks so much. We'll look forward to talking to you again soon down the road, if that's okay. And again, we really appreciate you being our first guest. We couldn't have picked a better person and a better player that Scott and I really love watching growing up than you. So thank you so much.
Well, I appreciate it. It's an honor, guys. Take care.
See you later, Mark. Thanks.
Bye-bye. Well, John, that was a great guest. I'm glad we got a chance to talk to Mark Price. As fans, it was something we've always wanted to do. And he gave us the perspective that we wanted, especially that local perspective growing up in Hudson. And what I found interesting about all of this was that, and it kind of hits close to home too, is that he said, you know what, it was nice driving to work, living in Hudson, driving down 303 through Peninsula, and you're at the Coliseum in 15 minutes. It reminded him of growing up in Oklahoma. That was an interesting kind of a warmth to that story.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'd love to hear that because you and I can relate to that. I remember, Scott, as a kid with you, going to Cavs games at the Coliseum and taking that same drive that he did, leaving Hudson, going on 303. You passed the Winking Lizard, one of our favorite places that you and I still go to.
Sure.
And then going through there, the nice scenic drive, and then boom, the Coliseum just pops out of a prairie, if you will. I mean, it was nicknamed the place on a prairie.
Right. I'll never forget real quick. And it was in the winter, my first Cavs game, and it would have been like 1984, 85, a long time ago. And I remember before you go into the Valley and Peninsula, you're at at the top of the hill. And in the winter, there's no leaves on the trees, and you could actually see the lights from the Coliseum on the top of the hill on the other side. And as a kid, I'm like, whoa, what is that? And it's like, my dad's like, oh, that's the Coliseum. We're going there. That's the drive that we all remember.
Yeah. And it was like the anticipation as a kid. You see it, you do see those lights. It's funny because I remember that too. And then you pull into the parking lot, and then you see this concrete structure right there. And it's like, and then you walk in, and it's funny. Someone tweeted an old Cleveland picture recently they tweeted a picture of the old Coliseum concourse, and it had the red and the blue and the yellow and orange, like typical 70s, 80s colors, for interior for buildings. And it's funny, like I remember those colors because the concourses were really small back then. For anybody listening to this that didn't go to those games, the concourses were small. There was only one, and it shared the lower level and the upper level of the Coliseum. And then you had behind you, if you're ordering your food, you had a big glass wall that looked out in the parking lot. So it was a very intimate arena. And when I look back at my early years as a kid, going to Cavs games with you and going to Cavs games with Dad, like that's what I remember. Like some of my earliest memories, of course, playing sports with you in the backyard and Dad and family vacations and things like that were at the Coliseum. That was the first sports venue and those first Cavs teams in the late 80s, early 90s and mid 90s that I fell in love with. So, when we were talking about launching this podcast, I'm like, Scott, we've got to get Mark Price. I mean, that was our guy. And I'm really glad that we got him on there. And it also was nostalgic for us because he made that same drive, lived in Hudson, lived very close to where we grew up. The other funny thing, the cool thing I liked to hear from him, which was kind of surprising that people may not have known. Mark Price played in an era with some all-time great NBA players. They all know about Bird and they all know about Jordan.
A very physical game back then,
and a very physical game back then, absolutely. And he played with Charles Barkley and then those other Piston teams that were really tough and physical, but including an Isaiah Thomas player, which I was kind of surprised when he said a player that was tough to guard or a player that he looked forward to going up against. So to me, when I heard that, and I kind of referenced back to those the Last Dance episodes of the Jordan documentary that came out last year, and that was a big section of that documentary. It was talking about the Cavs and the Pistons and how good they were and how good Isaiah Thomas was. And when we think back at the all-time great point guards, in my opinion, he kind of gets lost a little bit in terms of the all-time greats. And so to have Mark come on there and to talk about that, and he was 100% right. And I know his prime was a little bit before my time, but knowing the game and watching clips and hearing interviews, that was pretty cool to hear.
And it's interesting because, and one thing we didn't ask him, and we probably should have in retrospect, was talking about playing on the Dream Team, the second Dream Team.
Yeah.
The 1994 Dream Team, which was still packed with a lot of talent back. I think it was at 94, 1995.
94. Yeah.
That was a real interesting time too, and as a coach myself and watching my son and daughter go up through the ranks now that they're, my son's almost he'll be a junior in high school. My daughter's in 8th grade, and watching the changing landscape of youth sports over the last 15, 20 years, where everybody wants their kid to be the number one draft pick, and the push, and parents who push their kids tremendously. Yeah. It was fun and interesting and refreshing to hear Mark talk about how his dad, who was a coach, a lot of people don't remember that or realize that. And his dad really didn't push them. He was around it, and he liked to just sit there and absorb all this basketball around him. He mentioned his dad was on the road. His dad wasn't coaching him 24/7. So he wanted it. It wasn't that his dad or his mom wanted it for him. He wanted it. And I think that's a lesson for all of us parents.
Absolutely. And it's great that he said that. And for you to relate to that with having 2 kids and have coached them as they've grown up.
Right.
You're the same way with your kids and how that it works. And, it is refreshing to hear that, because I didn't know his dad coached, was an assistant coach in the NBA. I knew he coached. I didn't either. That was really cool. And to hear how he wasn't pressured to play or follow in his footsteps, and how his mom would always tell him, like, yeah, kids were running around eating food. You were there wanting to watch and wanting to play, and you put the effort in. And so, it just goes to show what his father did for him, right, in terms of developing him, or not really developing, but coaching him as Mark had his own interest into it, is such an old school mentality that I think, unfortunately, and this better than I do, is kind of lost in the everyday pressures of youth sports.
It is. It really is. One thing, and this is, talking with, professional athletes, John, and you've talked to a bunch of them, especially athletes that have retired, there's still an edge to them. You talk, I remember meeting, it was Cal Ripken about 10 years ago. And, he hasn't played in 20 years, but you talk to him, and physically they can't do it anymore. But mentally, there's this edge that that if physically they could go out there and play, they could play. I kind of sensed that a little bit with Mark when I was talking to him. I think we asked him the question, especially with his sons playing college ball, who would win a 3-point contest? And without skipping a beat, he goes, "Oh, I would." He goes, "As long as we're not moving, I could just do." I'm like, "Ooh, okay." That's, he still has that confidence. And that edge.
And I think that's really cool too, because as a player and an athlete, and you and I played sports, you have to have that. And
right.
And to have someone at Mark Price's skill level and, his legendary status with the Cavs, but also with his accomplishments. And now that he's older, to still have that, or maybe you could sense it, like you said, is fun to see and hear, especially when you're talking about, playing against your kids. And his 2 sons, one of his sons played at TCU and then UNC Charlotte, where Mark was eventually a head coach there at one time. And then his other son played at Liberty. I think he just transferred to a different school in Tennessee.
Correct.
So they are very, it's a gifted family in terms of playing sports, and his daughters played as well. I think one of his other daughters played at tennis at North Carolina. So, it's good to hear that. And a lot of these athletes, like you're right, though, they have a competitive edge, and when they get older, it's fun to see them not lose it. And it could be just not in sports. It could be playing cards or playing
ping pong in the basement. Exactly.
Exactly. So that was a really cool thing to see too. And, the other thing I love to hear when he was talking about for us too, is when he went back and talked about, the glory years of the Cavs and talked about the transition from the Coliseum to the Gund Arena days, which was all but 1 year. People forget he only played in, which is now the Rocket Mortgage Fieldhouse,
right.
Only played 1 year before he was traded. And, and the other part of that is that he still keeps in contact with all those guys. And when he mentioned that will be 2 years ago, when the Cavaliers brought the team, parts of those team and his teammates back for the 50th anniversary, I remember seeing it and seeing the little, specials that they had with them. And you had Craig Elo and Larry Nance and Brad Daugherty and a few other guys there. And It was cool to see them together. Lenny Wilkins was still there. Of course, Hot Rod Williams was not there. He had passed away a few years ago.
Sure.
And he was very close with Hot Rod. But you don't see that very much these days, having a tight-knit team that had been together and been through so much, still, keep in touch on a regular basis.
Right. Well, John, this was fun. This was a really cool episode. I'm glad we got a chance to talk to him. And I guarantee you our next couple of episodes that we have lined up, people are really going to enjoy it. We're not going to spoil it yet, but people are really going to enjoy it. So stay tuned to the next couple of podcasts. We'll have more information on that coming up very soon.
We are looking forward to keep this ball rolling, and we will have some interesting people coming up that I think everyone here will love right here on the Sabol Brothers on the Baseline podcast, all part of the Press Play Podcast Network.